So let's say you are building a product you're building a product that allows users from their country of residence to send money to any other user anywhere else in the world. So you send money in your own local currency to any user anywhere in the world, and the receiver gets the money in his or her own local currency. Now you can wait till you build out the complete product and integration and be able to add all the currencies of the world. I don't even know how many they are. That's one way to go before you launch. You make sure you have Japanese yen, you have Chinese, you have Korean won, you have USD, pound sterling, franc, you have all of Italian lira. You can wait to have all of these currencies before you launch. That's one approach. Or you could say, what are the most transacted or most frequently transacted currencies for my users? What are the top 10 or top 5 or top 3 that I can start with? So instead of waiting to integrate every currency, including Zimbabwean dollar, why don't you just like pick maybe USD, pound, maybe Chinese yuan, maybe top 3 or top 5 banks, and then launch with those ones. Instead of waiting the entire period for you to build all the currencies of the world, exchange rates, making sure that settlement happens, being able to transfer from this currency to that currency, and all the parties get value. That is essentially MVP. What is the smallest version of my product that I can build out right now so that my users will start experiencing my product so they can give me valuable feedback so that I can take that feedback and improve the product instead of waiting till everything is ready. So you're building a skyscraper. Could you just make one small room where you sleep there instead of sleeping under the bridge while you wait for your skyscraper to be ready? I hope my analogy is sensible enough, particularly the currency one, baby. MVP is very important for everybody, but let's narrow that to fintechs, right? There is so many things or so many aspects you can build for a fintech. You can be a remittance company. You can be a payment transfer kind of bank. You could be, play in the acceptance space where you help people process payments and receive payment. There's so many things you can be in fintech. And that's why it is very important that you narrow down what you become through an MVP. So it's very important because since you can be a lot of things and you can be anything, you can be many things, it's very important for fintechs to, start out small, one, so that your users can start to experience your products to give you feedback for future improvement, but much more on a selfish side for you as a fintech, so that you don't even run out of money when you're waiting to build the entire full bouquet of things you want to build. You want to do remittance, you want to do lending, you want to do payments, you want to do card issuance, you want to do all of this. Why don't you just start with one small space where your users, one, will start to hear about your brand name, to start to understand what your company is about, will start to use your products, give you insights and feedbacks, and maybe pay you money so that you can start to improve with the feedback they are giving you, stay in business with the money they are paying you, while you then actualize all your grand vision. Today, you have MacBook, you have iPhone, you have iPad, you used to have iPod, you have AirPod, you have all of these. Imagine if Apple waited to have all of these ready before they launch. They will run out of business. Amazon started selling books alone. Today you can buy a full car on Amazon. You can buy just about anything on Amazon. You can buy a full car. But imagine if they had been waiting to the point where they're able to sell cars and sell this thing and process payment, do overnight delivery. They will probably not be in business today. So for a fintech, it's very important that you build with the most minimum viable part of your product, so that your customers will start to experience your product. They will start to hear about your business. They will start to give you feedback and maybe pay you money, and so that you don't run out of business before you launch your grand vision. I remember when we launched Alert on May 2nd, 2017. On the web version, you could only sign up. Once you get to the dashboard, like you can only just enter your details and sign up. Once you get to the supposed dashboard, we ask you to please download a mobile app, Android or iOS. Why? Because we didn't have capacity to like build for Android, iOS, web, BlackBerry, and all of those other OS, while still keeping to the timeline you wanted to do. So prioritize what is key. Let users start to experience you, pay you money, give you feedback, so that you can stay in business. That's a bit of a difficult one, because all fintech, like I said, are not equal. Some are in acquiring business, some are issuing, some are just basic payments, some are full and just focusing on lending, some are focusing on remittances. Like there are so many things in fintech. So the way I look at it is, what an MVP for a fintech should contain is, the way I look at it is through subtraction. Instead of thinking, what can I add to my MVP? Take a list of your, like a laundry list of all the features and all the amazing ideas you have and all the things you want to build, and then start with subtraction. If I remove this, will I still have a decent product? Yes, remove it. If I remove this other one, will users still use this product? Yes, remove it. An example, it could be, let's say, use authentication as an example. You could start with password and OTP, or you could do password and Face ID, or password and fingerprint, or fingerprint and OTP. There's like so many different combinations that you could do. But then figure out, like, if let's say your users are mainly on Android, so they do fingerprint, lower tier Android, they do more fingerprint. There's no point doing Face ID, fingerprint, OTP, password, iris, and all of those things. Pick the ones that you think that if I remove this, a good number of my users or potential users will be affected. Keep that one. Remove Face ID. So the way I look at it is through the lens of subtraction. What can I remove? What can I remove? If I remove this, will this still make sense? And you know, MVP is two keywords in MVP: minimum and viable. Both are equally important, not just like I've done the minimum. No, is this still viable? Yes. Or is it viable, but it's not the minimum? Then you need to trim down a bit. So I look at MVP products, what could be part of an MVP from the lens of subtraction. What can I take out? I take this out. What else can I take out? So with our onboarding example, authentication, can I do just password and fingerprints? Because that's what my users use more. Because most of my users are on the lower tier of Android. That's enough. So you remove Face ID. You get into the dashboard. I want to do transfer to all currencies. Can I take out Zimbabwean dollar and leave USD? Fine. Can I take out, you know, I see this more from the angle of what can I remove instead of what can I add. And with MVP, it's not just features, it's also functionalities. What are the security things that I can do in the background that still keeps this product viable? Because many a times when we think of MVP product, people, founders, they tend to think of features. It's much more than features. It could be functionalities. It could also be, what platform should I be on? Should I be on Android, iOS, web, Hawaii? How's that pronounced again? You know what the platform I'm talking about. Should I be on Symbian OS? Should I be on Windows? Like, that's also part of it. Take out, remove. That's the way I look at MVP products in determining what will make an MVP. And in my past experience, we used to have a wall that's pre-COVID, right? We used to have a wall where we call parking lots. What we essentially do is to take all the ideas that anybody brings and say, hey, this idea is valuable. We put it here. We'll park it on the parking lot. So it's more towards removal, subtraction than addition when you're determining what should make the minimum viable. Remember, the focus is on minimum and viable at the same time. At the end of the day, an MVP is an MVP. The difference is who you are selling to, or who is using your product. With B2C products, the buyer is usually the user. But with B2B products, many a times the buyer is not necessarily the user. If you take, let's say we run a bank and we have a contact center. We're trying to buy equipment to help us make calls and receive calls. The buyer could be the CTO or the CEO of our bank, whereas the user would be the contact agents and the customer support people on the shop floor. So in building an MVP for a B2B or a B2C, in terms of product itself, I don't think there's any difference in terms of the MVP part of it. Where I see the difference is knowing who you're dealing with. In terms of B2B, you have sometimes a buyer being different from a user, and you need to make sure that the interests of those two parties are covered. In terms of B2C, the buyer is usually the end user. So once you talk to the buyer on what is important to him or her, you have already spoken to the user, unlike B2B. From my experience as well, I see that most B2C products, it's easier to be like the very minimum before you launch, as compared to MVP for B2Bs. But if you're going to deal with B2B on MVP part of it, one thing that is helpful is to have your products in modular form. So we have this module. You don't have to do the entire thing all at once. Version 1 has this module, version 2 is going to come with this module and that module and that module. So at the very core of it, there is no difference. MVP is MVP, whether you're dealing with B2B or you're dealing with B2C. But what is very important is to make sure that you satisfy the interest of the buyer and the user. In terms of B2B products, the buyer is sometimes different from the user. In terms of B2C, the buyer is usually the user, and it's very important to make sure that you capture the interest of those two parties. But at the core of it, there's MVPs and MVP, as long as it's minimal and is viable. Different companies, different methodologies, and different people, different approach. But I will always defend Agile. I will always defend Agile. I have tried Agile. I have tried Waterfall. I will always defend Agile, especially if you are building an MVP, because it lets you break down the entire laundry list of features you have into manageable chunks. Okay, I will do this now. I will do this. I'm doing this already. I will do this later. And after that, I will do this. Whether you're implementing Agile through Scrum or through Kanban, that's up to you. But at the end of the day, I have experienced Agile, I've experienced Waterfall. If you are going to be dealing with MVP, I will always recommend Agile, particularly Scrum, right? I think it's a better way to work. Many a times, just hoping that let's shall be going. As usually the case with Waterfall, we create everything before we start working. What happens when things change along the way? It's very difficult to retrace your steps. So if MVP is what you're focusing on, I would always recommend Agile and Scrum in particular. In fact, for me, it's beyond whether you are building MVP or not. Like I said, I've seen Waterfall, I've seen Agile and any day. And then there is this one that's local. I think most of the audience will be from Nigeria, so you can relate when we say Oga-driven development. So there is also Oga-driven development, which is essentially when the owner of the business or the most senior person says, this is what I want, build it, this is what you should build, this is what you shouldn't build. There's Oga-driven development, and stacked against Agile, none of these people stand a chance. There's a rule of thumb I play with by, which is when user experience is in direct conflict with security, security should always win. You want to make sure that the user has a very pleasant experience. But if you play in the fintech space, when you are dealing with people's data, very sensitive data, tax ID, BVN, and what have you, when you're dealing with people's data, and on top of that, you're dealing with people's money. People are less friendly when their money is involved. So I will always defer to the side of security when security is in direct conflict with user experience. That's like a rule of thumb for me in fintech. To ensure your product, like from the beginning, is compliant and plays by the regulations, I think one hard lesson some of us learned in the early days was trying to innovate, then layering compliance and regulatory requirement on top of it. I think it's the other way around. But have full understanding of regulations and compliance requirements, and then how you can bend the rule without breaking the rule, how you can go round it without breaking the rule. A good play here would be to involve the compliance experts. Again, I hope there are no compliance people on this call. I really don't like those guys, but it's a necessity, right? Like you have to involve them and involve them early enough. One of the mistakes we made before is to, try and think your way and ideate your way into a beautiful solution. And then you bring the compliance people or, legal people in to say, how can we be compliant, or how can we not break the rule? That's the wrong way to approach it. I think this regulatory or compliance people are also some form of really wonderful idea hubs, right? When you bring them in to say, I understand there's this regulation. In your own view, how do we navigate? So they are part of the initial conversation, not that you've done all your things and then you bring them in to say, please, help me sign off on this. No, you're just not going anywhere. So in summary, bring compliance and legal people into your ideation stage as quickly as possible, as early as possible. And very importantly, if you have to make a trade-off between user experience and security, security should always win if you are in fintech, because you're dealing with people's sensitive data. And very importantly, you're dealing with people's money. I would say as short as possible, then shorter. Whatever you think is the minimum time you should spend there, take a cut out of that time, and you'll be forced to either reduce your scope or you'll be forced to work harder to meet the timeline. If you don't so different approaches, you fix a launch date and see how much features or functionalities you can fit in between now and your launch date. Or you list a couple of must-haves and estimate how long it would take you to build those things. So any of those two approaches work. Fixing a launch date and seeing what you can fit in between now and launch dates, or having your list of must-have and then trying to estimating how long those would take to build. But more importantly, whatever time you estimate, it was very important to take a cut out of that time. The smaller time you give yourself, the harder you work, and the more critical your judgment is on what is in must-have feature and what is a nice to have. The example I used to give in this, not in fintech, but slightly related, you must eat, but must you eat at 4 Points by Sheraton? That's a different conversation depending on your income level. So if you have a fixed time to launch and then you reduce that time a bit, you'll be forced to make more strict or judgments on what should be an absolute must-have or nice to have, or we should have this because we have the time. So two approaches: fix a launch date, fit in between now and your supposed launch date, what could make it, or estimate the time it will take to launch that. Those are my two approaches. But more importantly, I think it is very important to spend as little time as possible, then shorter than that, to launch an MVP, whatever that means to you. So make sure you spend as small a time as possible before on an MVP. One, because you could be wrong anyway. So there's no point spending 8 months on a wrong idea if you could have spent 2 months there and find out that you were wrong and then you turn back. So as short as possible, and then a little bit shorter than that. It depends on what you've built and what you're optimizing for. So if you are optimizing for user count, customer acquisition, obviously you should focus on how quickly can I move from point of initiating my sign up and getting to the dashboard or completing my dashboard. So time, sign up time, number of steps in that flow would be one. If you're optimizing for revenue, for example, and then you start to think of how many are my active customers, how quickly can they make a transaction, how much do I make per transaction, what is free, what could be paid for. So it's really, really like broad, but it depends on what you're optimizing for. All fintechs are not the same. There are some that are hyper focused on growth and just trying to be the next thing after Uber and just take over the world and be very dominant. It doesn't matter if I lose money. I just want to be in every person's hand on every smartphone. There is that. So that would determine what you are optimizing for, what you are tracking. It just basically what you are tracking for would be determined by what you are optimizing for. If you're optimizing for customer acquisition, obviously your sign up flow, the number of steps, how long it takes to move from point A to point Z in your onboarding flow would be critical. If you're optimizing for revenue, then that's a whole different conversation. So first point is, what are you optimizing for? And that would then determine what you are tracking. And there's no wrong answer. It depends on what your focus is. Yes, what your North Star is. So different methods, right? And it could be as simple as taking a prototype that you built or you designed and asking the next 3 people in the office that are not part of the building process, for example, or taking it down the road. I'm essentially describing some of the things we had done in the past. Taking something you built or designed and asking people around you for their own views and opinion and the whys immediately gives you an instant feedback of the people right there at your corner. Walk down the building, go outside of the street, on the street, and ask a couple of people. That's also user research, right? We've also done focus group where you bring people in and then have them actually use the product while you film them and you see where they are stuck, where they are wasting time on, where they are confused about maybe picking the date on a calendar for the date of birth calendar you put there. So there are different methods. You could just basically ask the people around you, go on the street and ask people, create a simple Google form or online and share with family and friends. Again, with such online things, the shorter the question, the more likely people are going to fill it. But if you open a Google survey that says 100 questions, it will only require 2 hours of your time. I'm sure most people will just close it. So there are different ways you could, but what I say work most is actually to show people what you want them to give you feedback or not describe it. If you describe it, they may understand it, but it's different from when they have that thing in their hand and they are playing with it. So you could basically ask the people around you, give them a prototype to play with, ask people to download a sample, create a waiting list for people to be your beta testers. You could incentivize them. You could also decide not to do that, but essentially the most important thing is make sure you are asking people what they think. And the best way to ask them is to show them what do you want their opinion on. Seeing is believing in MVPs. So B2C, all the like online survey kind of thing works more for B2C. But B2B, what I've seen what would be more suited to having like a focus group where you have both the user and the buyer come in and then you ask them what their views are. Because you're not exactly optimizing for like having a large sample size. It is better to have like one-on-one conversations with B2Bs. But with B2C, just having people on a waiting list, sharing a link for them to join, creating a WhatsApp group for them to be part of your beta testers works. But if you are building for B2B, I would advocate more on having people, like having a physical interaction with them in form of focus group, including both the buyer and the user, if it is a B2B. So it's a slight different. Companies will usually not fill out any online form if you say, hey, I have a Google Sheet for your opinion. Companies will hardly do that. But if you go, set up a focus group with the company or the companies, you're more likely to achieve that feedback that way. So there's a slight difference on how you gather feedback from B2C and B2B. One of them being that B2C could respond to links and online surveys more readily than B2B. Now, B2B are easier to gather for a physical focus group than it is to gather B2C that might be scattered all over the world. Slight difference. The bottom line is get users' feedback. It's very difficult to know when what you have set out to do is definitely not working. It's very difficult. Sometimes it's a question of, should I double down and give it my all, or should I stop now and do something else? I would say that it's a very personal decision. If you had set out to solve a problem, but in realizing that in terms of current realities, you don't have the capacity to do that. So if you don't have the financial means or capacity to continue down the path that you had initially set out, and you're not finding money to fund investment to support that, it might be a good time to listen to investors and pivot to something they are willing to fund, or you figure out how to finance. Two, when a good proportion of your users are definitely using your product for something you initially didn't intend for, it could be a good sign to say, we've been working left, but then we see that most of our users are using our product to the right. It might be a good proportion of our users are using it towards this other angle. It's a good sign to pivot. So once once a good chunk of your users are, indicating something else, whether they are saying that directly or they are saying that through the usage of your products, that's a good sign to consider pivoting. If you're going to run out of business and investors are saying this is the way we from experience, and this is what we see, and we think you should go this way, listening to outside opinion of people you respect that have done it is a good sign that you might need to consider pivoting. And then finally, sometimes your product or your solution might just be way ahead of time or ahead of market. You might have to reconsider. Founders and product people are usually very opinionated. You think you have the grand vision, but the truth is that humans are terrible at predicting what the future would look like. Many people never saw the 1929 stock market crash. Many people didn't see 2007, 2008 financial crisis, and almost nobody saw the pandemic of 2020. Humans are terrible at predicting what the future would look like. So it is very important that you listen to other people, see what is happening, and then be humble enough to give up your initial assumption in the face of stronger evidence. Many a times we tend to look at launching as one big bang. You have to get a hall at a hotel. You have to print T-shirts. You have to do small jobs. Bring Olamide. No, it's not Olamide. I don't know who is ready now. Maybe Ashake. Bring these guys in, and if you have the money, you can absolutely get a hall at a hotel. But the way I look at launch is basically telling your users, hey, I have a solution to your problem. Would you like to experiment to try it out? This is it. So And luckily for us in the fintech space, you can always do a next version, right? And you can always relaunch in the event that launch didn't go well. And people have started to launch in separate ways. So you launch to your YC alumni, you launch to your Twitter audience, you launch to your guys on your community on Slack, you do a waiting list. People should start to see launching as not like one exceptional big bang, but more of continuous telling of your users that, hey, we have something that solves your problem. So I don't think big bang is necessarily the thing. I think launches should be in smaller bits and pieces, and many times, if the first launch didn't work, relaunch, call it 2.0, relaunch again, call it 3.0, launch again, call it 4.0, whatever works for you. So instead of thinking launching as a big bang, think launching as incrementally and continuously telling your users that you have something that will solve their problem. But when do you know you should move beyond the MVP and launch a new version? One is if you have sufficient stability on the MVP. So instead of rushing to launch a new update, if your MVP is not stable enough, you should probably focus on fixing that. If there is a security breach or threat on your MVP that could potentially damage your reputation and lead to more financial loss because you play in fintech, please focus on doing that first. If you feel like you have exhausted, users are already confident with the features and all you have done on MVP, and then there is more requests for additional features, it might be a good time to do all of those, to go for a new version. I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm speaking from my experience, right? Feature creep is the biggest mistake or when you are building an MVP. Absolutely deciding what is critical. It's not as easy as it sounds. Using the food example I gave before, it is critical that we all eat, and we know that. But deciding whether you should go to 4 Point by Sheraton or you should eat at Yamaruf's place is not as easy as you think when you have money. So if you have engineering resource, you would tend to think that we could just do it now. Let's just do it. Let's do it. Feature creep is the biggest mistake I see with MVPs. You want your MVP to have all bells and whistles and just be this beautiful and be this nice. And in fact, many a times when we're building MVP, because we've done competitors analysis using companies that are already 5 years in the business, you would want to, you skew your MVP features towards what their own product looks like. And that usually causes a lot of feature creep. It's not as easy as it sounds to decide what is an absolute must-have and should have. I think many a times that debate is a very big one, and you end up having an MVP that is competing with somebody's 5-year product. If you think you have you've reached, this is the minimum, you need to remove more. If you think you have reached, this should be my MVP, you need to subtract more. There's no one way, that makes this. There is outsourcing as one option, in-house as 2 options. The third option is a hybrid of both outsourcing and in-house. And I think if you want greater control, build in-house. If you want, maybe quicker time to market, you might consider outsourcing instead, because recruiting takes time, man. And having them to come and understand your culture, your company, and what you're trying to build also has its own time implications. There's no one way that fits both. I have worked in both, more on in-house and out a hybrid, but never a complete outsourcing. So I will always tilt, I'm biased towards having in-house team, But if you cannot achieve that, maybe because of time or even the availability of the skill, because let's not kid ourselves, a lot of the skills that we want are probably in Canada or UK. So if you can't achieve that, maybe in terms of availability of skill, try to do more of a hybrid. So it's neither this nor that, is what you're optimizing for. If you want control, more towards in-house, maybe speed, but then cost you more per unit, you might want to outsource. The third option is to have a hybrid of both of them. There is always a pro and con for each of these things. I will tilt towards in-house, although I don't know some of the background the person that asked the question is asking for, but I will always tilt towards in-house. And when I can achieve that, then hybrid will be my second option before the third and least preferable option to me is a complete outsourcing. If you are asking how do you manage engineers to stay on track for the MVP, what I've seen that works most, again, I preach work from anywhere you are, but if you are time pressed and you need to absolutely hit this thing by this time, co-locating people in the same place has absolutely worked, especially if your team is not that all much like super advanced senior level kind of developers. They need a bit of hand holding. The younger your team is, the more I would advocate for a co-working type of thing, and getting everybody being physically in the same space. Please don't eat me raw for advocating that people work physically together, but co-location works, especially if your team is young and you're racing against time. If your team is more mature and you are, people take personal responsibility and self-driven and all of that, it could basically just be a question of having regular alignment call and making sure that everybody understands what is at stake here. When we used to work pre-COVID, we had a countdown timer in the office that basically reminded everybody, we have X number of days to go. It was pre-COVID, so we were co-located. And thankfully, we had like the building to ourselves. We basically were living in the same office if you had to sleep over, no problem. And people being physically present there, seeing a countdown time and knowing what is at stake, and then having regular alignment is one of some of the ways I know you can get people to be on the same page. So again, if your team is very young, if it is practical and possible, get everybody in the same space. The more mature your team are, the more you can do a less of control. There's no criteria. You could fix it on your anniversary. You could fix it on your girlfriend's birthday. You could fix it any day you like. There's no criteria. You just fix it. What works is that if you don't have a launch date, people tend to work will always expand to fill the time available to do it, right? So fixing a launch date, there is no criteria for doing that. It could be anything. It could be on the company's anniversary, like we did with Wema and Alat. It was on the anniversary of Wema Bank being May 2nd that we decided to fix the launch of Alat. So there is no science behind that. Pick a date and just pick a date that is sufficient enough that you can aim to reasonably deliver something at, and then work towards that. Use that date as a driver to get everybody, like a rallying call to everybody to say, remember, we're launching on the October 1st. And if tomorrow comes and you're not able to meet that, again, it's not in the 10 commandments. If apologies to the non-Christians, you could always move that. Strategy at the junior level, you are basically doing writing user story, doing user research, collecting feedback, writing tickets, and running stand-up if you don't have a scrum master, those kind of basic tactical jobs. The higher you go, you tend to do more on the strategy level, opening up new markets, new opportunities. So we are into, just an example, right? Your company is into B2B transfers, like person-to-person transfer. Can we also do this or using crypto if regulation allows? Can we also do this as cross-border level so that I can send money from Nigeria to Togo or to Ghana? At that senior level, you tend to be responsible more of strategy and opening up new business, engaging at the C level than writing user stories and writing tickets and what have you. So I think it is more on the strategy side of things. You'll be responsible for revenue. Ideally, you will be responsible for some level of revenue, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing if you are required to be, if you are responsible for revenue. It's easier to make a case when you can point to bottom line, right? So at the senior level, you tend to be more on the strategy side, take more ownership of the business, open up more opportunities, and very importantly, coach and teach and handhold the other people. At the junior level, you would basically be doing the product management things, writing tickets, user research, running meetings and taking notes, following up. Hey, Salami, where are we on this? Tunji, you promised that you will be ready last week. This is week 2 now. Nothing is that. I think more on the strategy side at the senior level and ownership of business and opening up opportunity, and on the junior level, more on the tactical side of things. And the most important thing is wherever you are, do the best there. The way I see AI is more of an enabler and a helper for a PM. So I want to write user research. I want to write user story. I could let ChatGPT do that so that I can focus my time on the things that are personal, one-to-one kind of communication that I can outsource. So the way I see PM in this recent time is for product managers to basically know how to use these AI tools to support their own work, leverage them to be more effective. If you are going to write user story, again, another lame example, if you're going to write user story, why would you do that yourself when you can let ChatGPT do that? If you want to create a simple mock-up or a sketch, why would you do that when you could use some of these AI tools to get that sketch done? So I see it as helpful, supportive, and nothing more. So how do you navigate it in this time? Learn all that you can learn about it, leverage it to be more effective, leverage it to be more efficient. Only do those things that you can outsource. Well, focus group does not have to be in a rented hall and everybody is seated and just do it all over. Does the C-level play tennis? It could be another way to catch them to do focus group for you in an informal setting. The higher up these people are, the busier they are and the more not reachable they are to you. So leverage somebody higher up than you to reach these people. Are you a member of Ikoyi Club, for example? No, you're not. Maybe, right? Assuming you don't belong to Lagos Boat Club and you want to speak to people at Lagos Boat Club. If you can't do it yourself, find your manager, somebody more senior to you that is a member or has access to that kind of people, and then do it in an informal setting. It doesn't have to be like we set up a call and we gather everybody, we buy small chops for them. It could be informal, right? But more importantly, if you can't reach these people because of the social class or what have you, it is better to leverage the help of somebody who is up there. And it doesn't have to be like a formal you filming them. It could be an informal conversation. The more up they are, the more unaccessible they are, the more strategic you have to be in reaching them. Do they run every day at Ikoyi Link Bridge? You better start liking running. Or more. That's like, it's difficult, right? And I have had clients that wake up today, they have 1,000,001 ideas. Tomorrow they have another set of ideas. Next week, they are shouting that this is top priority. And then once you get onto the top priority, there's another top priority coming after they watch the next movie or something. So such clients is usually better to have like a proper documented conversations with them. When you have verbal conversation with them, drop them an email to say, based off on our conversation, and 1, 2, 3 from my understanding, right? 1, 2, 3 from our conversation, 1, 2, 3 are the priority areas that you like to focus on. Now, when that changes again, okay, give the responsibility to them to say, which of these 3 things should we drop, in order to accommodate this? Because you can't shorten pregnancies to 3 months by hiring 3 women to at once, right? So there's a limit to how much you can do. Let the clients be the one to say, okay, this is now priority for me. Let me remove this and add this. So for such clients, please have documented conversations. And even when the conversation is verbal, write them an email to say, hey, these are I understand these are the things we talked about the other time, and these are the top priorities that you would like to focus on. When that changes, go back to say, I understand we will need to change. So which of these other things should we substitute in place of the new requirement? It's very difficult, but when you deal with these people in written conversation, it doesn't make it less difficult, but it makes it more manageable. And then sometimes, like I always tell people, depending on where you are in the organization, not only your head, they go use the brick coconut, escalate this to somebody else that could support. You don't have to always carry this load. You are the founder, for example. How about, and you're the one negotiating with this customer? How about getting the CTO involved and their own CTO involved, and just like sometimes having people around be part of that conversation will help too. But most important thing I would say is let your conversations be documented.